Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast presented by Ronald Ocean. My name is the illustrious Joe Kuzma. The giggling you hear is the infamous Brian E. Roach. Brian, what's going on, my friend?
Booming.
Things are booming. Everything goes boom right about now. Just to let all the folks know, Brian and I were prepared to talk about coaching changes, release of Joey Porter, James Saxon, what's going on with Keith Butler, Steelers defense, all off the table, completely off the table. But before we get to that, I don't know if I've ever asked you why you go by Brian E. Roach. I don't go by Joe or Joseph D. Kuzma, and I might now if you have a good reason for adding the E in the middle there.
It's kind of like the for the Ohio State University. It's just in a different particular thing. I don't know. I have no idea. It just always has been that way, and so that's the way I do it. Although I don't run around and sign my name. Well, I guess I do sign my name that way. Oh well.
I didn't know if there were a lot of other Brian Roaches around, and you had to add the middle initial, or I guess here the is the E. I wasn't sure if there were other ones. Yeah. There are other Joe Kuzmas out there, but I think that's why I announced myself as you're the infamous, I'm the illustrious, but there's only one real Joe Kuzma. It's me, folks. I mean, there are others out there, but I think I'm by far the one with the most notoriety, and man, am I tooting my own horn, but we're going to get into divas here in a second. Let's just hope I don't turn into one.
There are several other Brian Roaches out there. There's an actor, some lawyers, some other things, but there's a vice president of sales.
Are you actively seeking this information out right now as we're talking, or did you know that off the top of your head?
I looked up my name on LinkedIn, and I found 25 other Brian Roaches. So that's very exciting. I came up first, though.
Ooh, it's probably because you're signed in as yourself. But before we bore everyone, it was, if I go by Joseph D. Kuzma, you know what the D stands for?
I'm not going to say anything because I could say several things.
Oh, come on, man! I was going to have fun.
How about
with this.
Dog?
No,
dog.
No, sir. Danger is my middle name. Boomin'. And boomin' we are. Let me tell you, folks, this is about as shotgun of an episode we may ever have. We've had many shotgun episodes, but information coming out just moments before we were putting our notes together to record and talk about coaching, completely off the table now, as Gerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette had a sit-down meeting with Steelers President Art Rooney II, and the topic of discussion, not much unlike all topics of discussion which we were trying to get away from. We tried it on the last one, too, without mentioning he who shall not be named 84. Ronald Ocean, otherwise known as Antonio Brown, is the topic of discussion. And, Art Rooney II, we're just going to say Art Rooney or Mr. Rooney or Art or however we refer to him going forward, because I can't say all this. It's just a mouthful. Steelers President Art Rooney II. Everybody knows who he is. Even if we just say the Rooneys, even though I think it's really just Art at this point, at least.
Art 2.0.
That's correct. He says the team is not going to release Antonio Brown, but, quote, all other options are on the table following the, what do we want to call it? The situation that occurred leading up to and since the final game of the regular season, a must-win situation. If you want to go back and hear quite a bit, an hour's worth, maybe one of the longest episodes we've had with Brian and the Professor Zach Meckler, covered a lot of angles of this. We're going to cover some different ones today because we're going to be mostly talking about, well, if you take and read what Gerry had said here, Gerry Dulac of the PG, he has a few comments, but I think the one that really stands out and one that he tweeted is, the exact quote is, hard to envision Antonio Brown being with the Steelers when they report to training camp in July, and seeing as he's due a roster bonus, 5 days into the league year when that begins in coming up here in about 2 months in March. It sounds like if you're reading into this, and it's not hard to read into, I defend a lot of people and a lot of things here. This hurts me because I love Antonio Brown. I think he's a player that's done things other players have never done, but it doesn't take much to connect the dots here. It says pretty much in black and white that the Steelers are going to attempt to deal Antonio Brown, and he's played his last game as a Pittsburgh Steeler.
Yeah, I think it's notable. Dulac notes that, and we talked about this. They can't do anything with him until March 13th, which is the start of the 2019 season, and then he's due that bonus. But so really, and we said this in that earlier podcast, that's the window that they have, and that makes it a little more interesting because they have to try and get something done quickly, but. I mean, the thing is, and I said this to Zach earlier, even though they only have a small window of opportunity before they have to pay that $2.5 million, roster bonus, that window doesn't prevent them from having, in my view, conversations, even if it's not legal, even if it's outside the bounds of what the league is allowing. Conversations can be had, and feelings can be felt, and thoughts can be thoughted. And they'll have an idea what they want to do by that time, and they'll have an idea of who the potential partners are. And we can speculate, and we may speculate on that as this show goes on.
Not hard to speculate because, I mean, it's not like Antonio Brown's going to come cheap.
No, he's not. Obviously, you've still got the 3 years that are left on his contract, which, essentially he's going to make 15, 11, and 12 million over those as cash, and he's got some nice cap hits with bonuses and prorated, and he may want to renegotiate that deal with whoever he signs with or gets traded to. But it's not. Yeah, it's not. You're not talking about an inexpensive payout on top of what you're going to have to pay to get him, what you're going to have to give up to the Steelers. And we've already had a smattering of conversations in the back rooms with Eric and Zach and some others who have speculated as to what we might be able to get it for Antonio Brown. But that's the question: is what's the starting point, right? If you're going to trade? If the Steelers are going to seek to get any kind of value, what's the starting point? What's the starting point for a conversation with any team for Antonio Brown?
I don't know. That's a very loaded question because, I mean, we went from, should the Steelers do anything? What's going to happen? Is this just a little temper flare up? And from what we're reading from the PG article is that, apparently Ben wanted to rerun a play. And I guess Antonio Brown ran the play wrong, had his feelings hurt for whatever reason, threw a ball to the ground and left. And I guess that would have happened on Wednesday, which, kind of totally throws out the window, which we were already throwing out, any idea that this was over Juju winning the MVP, which was just, I thought that was ludicrous to begin with, but that happened a day later. So apparently the flare-up happened on Wednesday, and I'm like, they put him on the practice report. He was obviously still around, like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because Friday is the day that Tomlin sent him home, and that's aside from, he disappeared, didn't do the walkthrough on Saturday, and Tomlin had a meeting with him Sunday after Drew Rosenhaus, AB's agent, talked, I guess, texted, called, whatever be the case. And you were reading into that. Me and you were kind of back and forth on this. Believe it or not, we don't always agree on everything, folks. But we were back and forth on, is that odd? Is that awkward? And I mean, we've had agents on the show before here, and it seems like the agents kind of do it's like, especially for a guy like Antonio Brown, it's like, they're going to do anything. They're probably wipe his posterior if he asked. And I didn't think it was, maybe that was out of the ordinary. It all depends on how, I don't know if we don't know if Tomlin talks to Drew Rosenhaus on a weekly basis regarding his client Antonio Brown. So it just seemed out of the ordinary because we're not in that business. We're not in the know. We're not behind the closed doors. But apparently, that's Tomlin said, hey, we got to have a face-to-face. He had a face-to-face before the game. They talked about what Antonio could do. The best thing was to support his teammates. And they'd made the decision, since he didn't practice, or I guess he got very little practice and they don't know if he's really hurt or whatever be the case. He may be injured for all we know. We don't know that information rock solid yet. It's just the indication right now is all signs are pointing at that being kind of, what do you want to say? An excuse for behavior. I mean, well, I'm just to close this up. That's the last time anybody spoke to him, according to this PG article.
I agree with that. And I think to be clear, I don't think he practiced beyond whatever that play was that week. Because in the article, it's pretty clear that he basically skipped all team meetings and all practice from that point on that week, and would not return phone calls from Rooney, Tomlin, or other players. So you're talking about a guy who essentially distanced himself from the team at the point where it was, a do or die game. As everybody said, this was it wasn't all up to them, but they absolutely had to win that game in order to have any shot at the postseason. And their star wide receiver is nowhere to be found and completely incommunicado. I think, we talked about, the little, potentially the kerfuffle with Ben and, Antonio having a fit. And I agree. And even Rooney says in this article, he says, my belief is there's more to it than an incident one day at practice. And he would have liked to have been able to talk to Antonio Brown to find out what that was. The problem is, I think, the professor of football, Zach Meckler, he wrote a nice article detailing a lot of the things about what we may have missed sign-wise with Antonio Brown. And I know Tommy Jaggy's got an article that's going up either right before our podcast goes up or later today when the podcast
it's already in the wild.
Up.
Yeah.
Already live. That details, a lot of the pros and cons about what Antonio Brown is bringing to the Steelers. And I think the bottom line of what I'm getting at here is I agree. It didn't just start with that incident, but I think the problem is, despite what we may believe and what he has sometimes said, Antonio Brown is about Antonio Brown. And, as long as the years were going by and he was the number one receiver and he was getting all the notoriety and he was getting all the press and he was getting all the attention, everything was cool. But that changed at some point this year and maybe towards the end of last year as Juju started to emerge. He wasn't the guy who Ben always went to. And in fact, he started to be less targeted this year than in years past. And I think that is the beginnings of where this starts, is that, he wasn't getting fed the way he was used to being fed. He wasn't getting the attention he was used to getting. And look, this is just my opinion, but my opinion is that doesn't work for Antonio Brown. If he's not the number one target, if he's not the number one priority on the team, then he's not happy.
See, this is where I struggle with this, and it's more or less because I don't know that I don't see any warning signs with him, like not liking Juju. Those guys are doing.
Well, I don't think it's a dislike of Juju at all. Let me be clear.
Like a jealousy, like a competitive thing. I mean, both of these guys had 1,000-yard seasons. It's not like Antonio Brown was dog meat either. He was targeted. Is actually targeted 2 more times than Juju, 168 times. I mean, Ben threw how many more passes? We went over this the last time.
Yeah.
More attempts and more completions, pretty much than anybody else in the league. He did more than anybody else in the league this year, including his over 5,000 yards. It was a very pass-happy offense. I don't know if it's the attention given to Juju that maybe I don't like.
There you go.
I don't know that I like reading into that, because still, Antonio Brown. This is the thing that's most bizarre for me, and I can't recall if you and Zach made this point or not, so I'll bring it up again. He caught 14 passes for 185 yards and 2 touchdowns before all this went down against the Saints in a game I still feel the Steelers should have won because of ticky-tack officiating BS calls. I'm sorry, it's out there. The refs stink. Still made it onto this podcast regardless of talking about AB. 19 targets. I mean, by far his biggest game of the season, and one of maybe three where he scored more touchdowns this year. I have it right here, than any other season. He had 15 TDs this year. He had 3 other multiple TD seasons, but last year only 9. So he didn't have as many receiving yards this year, 1,297 to 1,533 in 2017, but he caught 3 more passes. Maybe not 129 and 136 like he did in 14 and 15. So, but he's still putting up numbers that are just ungodly. They're like John Madden football video game numbers. So I'm not, until I hear from him. But the problem is nobody's heard from him. Nobody knows. And because he isn't communicating, you're almost thinking, okay, there's something else here. And it's probably since nobody really talked to him and his agent is sitting there talking about whether or not his availability is for a must-win game in Week 17. You got to be thinking that, okay, nobody's talked to Antonio Brown. Maybe Drew Rosenhaus really hasn't talked to Antonio Brown. There's got to be some other discussion behind closed doors. You don't usually see somebody or hear someone like Art Rooney II come out and make the kind of statements that they're making. So I find it just bizarre that you go from, season high day, like, AFC Offensive Player of the Week type numbers from Week 16 to walking out of practice and basically demanding a trade or something days later. It's so bizarre to me.
To me, it's you've heard the expression too little too late. That's the way I look at it. Look, that's the kind of game Antonio Brown wanted to have every week. That's the kind of game he's used to having every week. And that's the kind of game that, had it happened early in the season, where he starts off fast and he starts to explode, and people are again talking about him in terms of remember the conversation last year that Antonio Brown should be MVP.
Oh, absolutely.
All this stuff gets into people's heads, right? And this was not, even though it was a good year and potentially even a great year, it wasn't last year. It wasn't the kind of year he's been having. And it was a declining year for Antonio Brown. And I don't think that he knows how to deal with that. But even though he has a great game towards the end of the season, I think that he's already soured at that point. We see it throughout the year. There's just these little subtextual things with how he talks and how he presents himself, and little digs that sometimes seem to occur. It didn't feel like it was the same relationship with the team that he's used to or expected to have. Now, it doesn't look, I'll be the first to say I don't put that necessarily 100% on Antonio Brown, and there certainly could be other things that may have disturbed him. But when you start to hear things like he yells at Dick LeBeau and says, "I'm the franchise, you can't touch me," you hear from other people that he is only concerned about his stats and not about winning games. We talked about the stuff Ryan Clark came out with. There's a lot of stuff out there that Zach and I touched on this, that the Steelers tend to keep internalized and do a fairly good job of. It's just come out. That's all.
Well,
it's just not, they're not able to keep this under wraps. And I think in many ways it started with the Facebook Live thing. Look, he just started doing whatever the heck he wanted to do.
Yes and no. I mean, I guess James Harrison did the same thing. I guess this is part of the problem too, of course, is you've got guys that have been around the organization, or Antonio Brown has been around, such as James Harrison, pretty much doing whatever he wanted and getting kicked off the team a year ago about this same time. You have Le'Veon Bell sitting out of camp twice. Then you have the whole Young Money clique, or the Young Money crew, with him and Mike Wallace and Emmanuel Sanders, and Mike Wallace, with all of his demands, and Sanders going, and Sanders stood up the one team, who was it, maybe the 49ers or whatever they thought they were going to sign with, and he, pulled a rabbit out of the hat and ended up with the Broncos, and these guys are all still tight. Wallace has bounced around the league all over, and the only one that has the ring right now is Sanders. And and AB's getting up there. He's 30 years old right now. He's going to be 31. We're going to talk about how that factors in, and the Steelers doing whatever. You know what else I'd like to read into this, Brian? I mean, yelling at Dick LeBeau and Ryan Clark having not been with the team for what now, 3, 4, 5 years or whatever. Those things, I'd really take a lot of that with a grain of salt. I think they get magnified. And a lot of times Ryan Clark is the guy who has the dirt, so to speak, that he dishes on the Steelers. And, he didn't necessarily leave. He still wanted to play football. He didn't leave on the best of terms necessarily. And he's in the media. He's in the spotlight. But yelling at Dick LeBeau, I mean, come on now. We've seen Ben yell with Todd Haley. We've seen how that type of thing goes. Ben
but there's a difference.
And we did say this. We did say this, and you said this in the back rooms. You said QB. It was like a formula: QB greater than wide receiver. So
yeah, it just is. And Ben's yelling at Todd Haley, who is his own position coach, or offensive side of the ball coach, not yelling at the defensive coordinator. And telling him, you can't touch me.
Yeah, but we don't know what Ben's saying. And, you don't know if Ben said something to somebody. I mean, that doesn't bother me a whole lot. It's like a dysfunctional family, just like me, you, and, Terry. And I got to throw Terry in there.
It's that context. To me, when you say to somebody, look, I don't like this play is stupid, I want to run the play I want to run. Okay, that's still diva behavior. But when you then say, you can't touch me, I'm the franchise, that is elevating yourself above your teammates. That's a different attitude.
But how long ago? That was like 2014. When did he get paid? He got the new deal in 2013. That was Wallace's last year. So, I mean, it had to have happened somewhere around then, you would think. And, I mean, Clark was gone 14, 15, somewhere in the whereabouts of that, too. So, I mean, I don't know exactly when that would have happened. Dick LeBeau, his last year, Keith Butler took over in 2015. So, his last year would have been 2014. He wasn't the franchise yet. I mean, if it's 2030, there's still Sanders is still there, Wallace is still there, and I'm going to kind of get to that actually in a moment here, because the Steelers absolutely have experience with moving on from wide receivers, and you can see
did they ever.
How it's like I hate to use the term dime a dozen when you're talking about somebody who's arguably the greatest. You talk about all the guys the Steelers have had. He's maybe one of the greatest, if not the greatest ever. And I'm just going to say dime a dozen and throw it out there because they've moved on from Wallace, they moved on from Sanders, and of course Santonio Holmes. I mean, it's not unheard of that they can move on, and we're going to talk about how they can move on, what they might get, and stuff like that, just to not continually, question Antonio Brown's character. But the one thing I wanted to swing back around here with Gerry Dulac's article is this. My impression of this and the kind of, what do you want to say, the unprecedented talk with Art Rooney too, is that this is the only other way we can get out to Antonio Brown, since he is not communicating whatsoever. So maybe the message might be sent. That's about the most I could say about that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think, look, as you read this article by Dulac, you hear Art Rooney saying some very specific things, but he also clearly says the door's not shut. He's not anything more than blunt in saying, as we stand here right now, I don't know how we can make this work, but if we can, we'll try. But that's going to be not just dependent on the Steelers. A lot of that is going to be dependent on Antonio Brown. And, we're going to hear probably a whole lot of stuff over the next 2 months, before we get to that date in March. That is going to be both positive about Antonio Brown, negative about Antonio Brown, positive about the Steelers, negative about the Steelers. You're going to have people who are going to be on Team AB and people who are on Team Steelers. And, it's going to be a contentious period of time. But, I think that what you can take out of this article is that as of right now, if the Steelers can get something for Antonio Brown, they will.
Yeah, and here's another guy they moved on from, Martavis Bryant, who they did get something from, and there was quite the what do you want to say, moaning during the draft about that. We're still not sure how that's going to pan out with James Washington, but the Steelers know what they have in-house, and they've certainly made this move before, and we are also seeing moves that appear to be related to culture. There's something poison in this locker room where the team is just not on the same page. I mean, even with them winning 9 games, a few of those wins weren't the prettiest wins, and we also saw that even though they won 13 the year before. We were going to talk about coaches. I was going to talk about how, it's not all on the defense necessarily. This offense is supposed to be high-powered, scoring 30 points, 40 points, and they weren't reaching necessarily that goal with all of this killer bees and everything else. So Bell on the outside looking in now. You have AB on the outside looking in. You have Joey Porter gone, James Harrison gone. We don't know James Saxon's involvement with some of this stuff. We don't know who else is going, who else is coming, things of that nature. And I think this is a shift. I think it really is a shift that, okay, we had problems with this and this. It's time to, cut ties. Now, I don't think if Antonio Brown didn't do what he did, then we probably wouldn't have discussed this, or we may not even know the extent of the tension between all of these parties involved. And we're going to see, Antonio Brown's not playing in the Pro Bowl. He pulled out. Juju Smith-Schuster takes his place, of course. So there's no communication. We just know that the Steelers are going to investigate looking for something. And what might that something look like? Well, we were talking about the various teams, but first, salary cap wise, not Antonio Brown, but Art Rooney had said, this is his quote via Gerry Dulac, of course, once again, "I'm not going to say that's going to box us in anything. If we decide something has to be done, we'll figure out how to deal with that." And that's over salary cap ramifications, because the Steelers would be due, or would have to, they would take a cap hit, so to speak, but they would also get some of this money back. And there's a great tweet out here by Ian Whetstone, who is, I believe he's with Over the Cap, but he does a lot of salary cap just manipulations, and it all depends on if Antonio Brown's released and the date he's released. There's all kinds of roster bonuses and all kinds of accounting things that will just make your eyes glaze over. But in short is, if the Steelers if they move Antonio Brown, I believe before, 5 days into the league year, they would get back like $15 million roughly. So they get a little bit of savings as well, but they would be eating like 22 million, somewhere in the ballpark.
21.1. Yeah, 21.1.
I mean, it's all over the place. I'm not the accountant. I don't like the figures. The only thing I can tell you is like, who has the ammunition? Who can afford Antonio Brown? And what would the Steelers get? I mean, this isn't a third-round draft pick for Martavis Bryant, which we said was very generous from John Gruden. And you know what? They put up with so much stuff to get Martavis Bryant back on the field, with the suspensions and the failing the substance abuse or the drug policy, whatever one of those it was, because there's 2 different policies if people don't know. It's just not drugs. Performance-enhancing drugs is the other one, and then substance abuse is one as well. And they worked with him and to get him back on the field, and then they cut ties. It was boom. Even the Browns got sick of Josh Gordon. So, but Martavis Bryant still was on a rookie contract. You got this huge contract with Antonio Brown, and he's probably going to want an extension to get paid. He's going to be turning 31 shortly, which is part of Tommy Jaggy's article here about why the Steelers need to trade Antonio Brown. That's up on the site. He has the stats. He's saying he's in decline. He made these same, when Tommy speaks a lot of times, he really changes my mind on some things. This is worth a read if you folks go over to steelcityunderground.com, because he had this same type of scenario with Le'Veon Bell last year, and he kind of turned some of us on to Josh Dobbs during the draft process too, and he got his guy, so that was kind of cool. But the teams with the cap space, I'm looking at Over the Cap right now. This is 2019 projected. The Indianapolis Colts overwhelmingly had the most, because they're really only paying Andrew Luck right now, and Ebron gets a little bit of pocket change too. They have 122 million cap space, followed by the Jets with 99. I'm not going into points and decimals. I'm going to round here. Bills 87, Cleveland Browns 84. The Cleveland Browns have Jarvis Landry and Antonio Brown. I might puke. I'm just going to say that. The Oakland/Las Vegas Raiders, wherever they end up playing, have 78. The Houston Texans, 67. Cardinals, 64. 49ers, 62. Seahawks, this one surprised me, 60 million. And how about them Cowboys, 55. Bengals, 52. Broncos, 45. And then you start getting into the 40s or so, and the Steelers have about 27. So you're looking at the teams at the top there, and the ones that had a poor record this year, not the Colts, but the Jets, the Bills, the Browns are going to have a little bit worse of a draft pick than they're used to. Raiders have 3 number ones. Houston Texans, they made the postseason, so they're going to be drafting lower in position than the Steelers are. And these were all places that people were speculating Le'Veon Bell could end up too. And then, of course, Arizona and the 49ers, probably the other two that really jump out on the page here. You were discussing this. We were all talking about this as this was all going down. Oh, what's it going to take? I just said it's not going to be a third rounder. You said minimum first rounder for a guy that's going to be turning 31, but how many more years does he have left? He's going to be an improvement for any team that ends up getting him.
Absolutely. In my mind, you're not talking about a mid-level or even a lower declining athlete. He may be in decline from his prime. He is still better than 90% of the wide receivers in the league. So the skill set is still there. And in my mind, you cannot, the conversation has to start with a number 1 draft pick. That may not be where it ends, but that's where it has to start, at least in my view. That may be offset by if there's a player involved in the draft or in the trade. But, I look at teams that are sitting here. Look, I hate to say it, the Raiders have the most ammunition to come after Antonio Brown. When you're primed with 3 number 1 draft picks, you've got the potential to really say, we can still do a lot of damage in the draft, and we can give you a number 1 draft pick and get Antonio Brown.
Hold on, let me interrupt
Here's
1
the
second.
downside.
This would be the most Gruden thing ever. Straight out of Draft Day Part 2. Let's replace Kevin Costner with John Gruden. All 3 number 1s for Antonio Brown, and the Steelers won.
Yeah, sure.
I'd do it. I would do it.
Oh, I'd do it in a second. Are you kidding me? Oh my goodness, I would jump at that. You're talking about the 4th pick overall plus 2 other picks, and all we're giving up is the 20th and AB. Oh my goodness, yeah, I would jump all over that. That's not gonna. Look, the thing is,
but it would be the most Gruden thing ever to see that happen, though.
It would be. But this is the note of caution that I've thrown all of this, and it might make the Raiders a non-player in this, is that they hired Mike Mayock.
Hey, yeah, well, you know what, though? We don't know. He goes from, I don't know, what's his NFL executive experience? I never even got really into that. I just know him as a guy on TV.
He just knows that he wants his – he has – I don't know what it all is, but I know he has some. And what he definitely has is draft clout. And he knows that the value of those 3 picks. And I think you're going to be hard-pressed to get – you'd have a battle. You'd have a battle between Gruden and Mayock to try and release all 3 of those picks. I think you could pry 1 away. You might even be able to pry 2 away. But you'd have to get something back. Like I could literally see them saying, we'll give you the 4 and 1 of the other picks for yours and Antonio Brown. That I could see, not all 3. As much as I would love it, and I agree with you that it's a Gruden move. And look, this is a Gruden guy. Gruden loves AB.
I know.
I mean, you got to think Gruden has been reading these bits and going, we got to get him. That's my guy. That's my kind of guy. That's going to be my guy. We're going to remake the team, and that's my guy.
Gerry Dulac didn't even finish the interview with Art Rooney, too. Art's getting texts from Kevin Colbert.
Yeah.
I mean.
John Gruden going, okay, I'm ready. I'm here. Let's talk. I don't know. And I guess, but that's my starting point. My starting point is a first-round pick. And the question then becomes who's really got the capital to give up a first round pick. And I will say very clearly, it doesn't matter to me if it's this year or next year.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that, with a future first round pick being in 2020 as opposed to being in 2019. I think you got to get something in 2019. But if you get a second in 2019 and a first in 2020,
okay,
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, because we know where the second is already. Because
Yes.
the Raiders' other two picks, one from the Cowboys for Amari Cooper, and then where was the other one at? They got one from the Bears, which should have just been determined right now. Yeah, so that's
24.
That's 24. We still don't know where the Cowboys pick's going to be. It's going to be later than 24, which is beyond the Steelers picking at 20. And then, of course, they have their own pick at 4 for having a miserable season, finishing 4-12. The problem is if you trade a number 1 that's in 2020, you don't know if the Raiders are going to turn this thing around next year and go 12-4, win their division, and then you're getting pick 28 or something for Antonio Brown. But if it's next year's, if you end up with 2 first round picks in 2020, but you end up with the Raiders would be picking see, there's 32 picks, add 4, 36, right? They would have 36 overall would be their second round 2019 pick. I don't think that's so bad of a deal there, but not all first round picks are created equal. You're gambling on when that pick's going to be, and we talk about this a lot during the draft season about what collateral it takes just to jump into the top 10 or to jump from 5 to 1. You've seen what the Eagles and the Bears and all these other guys have done in order to try and draft a QB. I could even see the Steelers acquiring the 4 and then moving back possibly. But moving back always seems to be you got to have value for where you're currently at. People got to want it, and it just doesn't work from. You probably aren't going to move back from 20 unless someone's trying to jump up. I don't know, the Saints jumped up to grab that one linebacker or whatever this year, things of that nature. So it'll be interesting. It depends on what the Steelers envision their future being, because then they're going to have to replace a wide receiver now too.
Yeah, just to be as an example, when you talk about point values for some of these draft picks, the 4th is valued at 1,800 points, whereas 36 is 540. And the reason is because that's the kind of drop off that you expect to have in the quality of player that you're going to get at those points. Doesn't mean that that's correct. As we all know, Antonio Brown's a 6th round draft pick, so you can get some great players way down the line, but the projection is that you're going to get a better player, and therefore those picks are valued much higher. To jump to the point you just made, I mean, they will need to address wide receiver, because if they do trade Antonio Brown, they've got Juju, they've got James Washington, they've got Switzer, they've got Eli, DHB. Am I missing somebody? Am I forgetting anyone?
Well, I don't know. I don't know that they have Hunter or DHB, because those are, final year of their contract. They're going to be
right this moment
free agents, and I think Eli was exclusive
Hunter's
rights are
out.
Restricted. Well, he is out. He laid out for one of Ben's passes and jacked up his shoulder or something.
Out, yeah.
So, but I mean, these are the guys. Basically, Juju and James Washington is what you're rolling into the future with. The rest is to be determined by the offseason, whatever moves, and the draft. And I don't know. We've been here before. It was like, how are you going to replace Jericho Cotry and his 10 touchdowns? And they seem to always find a way. There was also it's too big of a moment for them with guys like Kobe Hamilton or DeMarcus Ayers or those type of guys that were on the roster. So, I mean, it's just but, I mean, a lot of people are going to be like, there's no way you can get rid of Antonio Brown. I mean, Rooney even said it in this article, though. He says he's not going to use the word trade. He says all options are on the table. I'm not going to use those words. All options are on the table. We have 2 months to go before we can do anything. There's no sense making the decision now. We'll see how things play out. Maybe he decides to talk to us someday and we learn more about where he is. We'll see. But, I mean, how much more of a future does Antonio Brown have in the NFL, period? I don't know. Tommy Jaggy shows that he's in decline. His catch rate has been down from the last 5 years. It's steadily declined over the last 2 years. His first down percentages have also declined, and the amount of picks on targets for AB was at an all-time high at 11 this year, up from 6 in 2017 and 5 in 2016. So Ben forcing the ball maybe his way. Those two not on the same page. Ben throwing a lot of interceptions. Maybe there's a bone of contention there. I don't know. We also know that Antonio Brown, if he was hurt, We know he was nursing an injury during training camp. Apparently, maybe he was filming The Masked Singer and that was a cover. I don't know.
Well, there you go.
I mean, that's a possibility. But we know he got hurt the previous year too. So now he's getting banged up. You're dealing with the guy. The best ability is availability. Wasn't available week 17. Wasn't available at the tail end of the year last year. He wasn't available in the playoffs for some time because Burfict headhunted him. That I can't really hold against him. But there's a concussion history now too. He's going to be 31. I don't know, man. June or July he's turning 31. So it's not like right away around the corner. But, Father Time eventually comes knocking. And when you're looking at this, not everyone plays forever. I mean, Jerry Rice and Randy Moss tried to, but it doesn't always work out when you're a wide receiver.
Yeah, I think that they will definitely need to address it. And you're absolutely right. Look, he's on a decline. And when receivers fall off, they fall off. But this is a different receiver. As much as I am not right now in Antonio Brown's camp, I will never take anything away from this guy. He is still a self-made guy. He is still the hardest working guy that's there. Whether the reason he works so hard is for personal accolades and personal glory, much more so than team accolades and glory, that's my supposition, but it doesn't change the fact that nobody works as hard as he does. Nobody puts the effort in that he does. And he's a kind of guy that I think can play longer than you think because he keeps himself in such great, he could potentially have some nagging injuries. He could, and he's not the biggest guy, but he runs routes like nobody's business. I don't think he's much slower than he was, if any. And I think he's got more years than we think he has in the right place. But now, if you remember, maybe 3 years ago now, I wrote an article, kind of like a chicken and the egg article. Is Ben making AB great or is AB making Ben great?
Yep.
And at the time, it was kind of like, I think they just both make each other great. Because they had that kind of a chemistry. And we saw glimpses of it this season, and we also saw where it wasn't the same this season. And the one thing that you will learn from a trade like this or a move like this is whether AB is AB someplace else. And that's just, you never know that until it happens. We can say all the good stuff about him, but that's all predicated on being in this offense with this quarterback.
Yeah, to just kind of put a bow on the whole thing, we were talking, we really went off the reservation, just kind of pinning it on the Raiders. We really don't know. It's kind of speculative. We still don't know. They could be talking, but there's all kinds of. You went over all the blow-ups, all the history, things of that nature, what happened in training camp with Ed Bouchette, the lawsuits he was dealing with, the driving, 100 miles an hour in a sports car or whatever down McKnight Road, all these different little things. And that is just this season, he stays clean and relatively, doesn't pick fights or does any type of, kind of jag-off type things like that. You know what I mean? You don't think of him as like an Ocho Cinco, but when this kind of thing happens, he starts to get lumped into that type of group of the diva receivers, Michael Irvin, guys of that nature. And you tend to look around, okay, what kind of team is going to want to deal with this type of deal? The Colts already made the playoffs. I could see them having the cap space, but we don't know where their pick is yet, and we're assuming it would have to be a pick that would have to be sent along. I don't think they're going to send Darius Leonard to us as much as we would like to if that were a trade for Antonio Brown, and there has to be picks that are involved, and some of these teams are picking a little bit higher that also have the cap space, which, this isn't a coincidence. It's because they aren't paying anybody or they're cutting bait with players that weren't getting it done. The Cardinals have the top overall pick. The Niners are number 2. The Jets are number 3. We already mentioned the Raiders at 4. Bruce Arians is going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with number 5. The Bucks, though, I went looking for them on this chart. Yeah, they don't have the room necessarily to do any type of move like that. Jeez, I can't even find it. I hate the way they color code this thing sometimes because where the heck is Tampa Bay on this list? I can't even find them on the. Oh, they're next to the bottom. There's only 2 teams three teams worse, the Vikings, Jaguars, and Eagles, and the Jaguars are here in the top 10 as well. They're picking number 7. The Giants don't necessarily have the ammo, nor do I think they need him with Odell Beckham Jr. there as well. And then it's the Lions. The Bills have the 9th pick and so forth from there. So you're really, if you're looking at the top 10, that's where you're looking. But, I mean, it could be anyone. It depends on what goes forward from here. Art Rooney saying basically all bets are off. Anything's on the table. The only thing they're not going to do is just outright release him because you know what? Antonio Brown still has value to the Steelers, whether or not he's on their roster in 2019 or he's dealt elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I'll throw my 2 cents into this in that I've already said I think the Raiders are an interesting prospect, but the Mayock factor makes me a little less suspect. The Jets in prime time with a new coach, in the Big Apple there, they could use somebody with that kind of personality to make a big splash. Garoppolo could sure use a competent receiver out in San Francisco. So those are 2 potential locations, and I'm not throwing the Bills out of the mix because they potentially, they've tried to draft receivers and it hasn't worked for them. Why not try and take a stab at one that you already know has a track record and give your young quarterback somebody to throw to? It's just crazy thought.
Well, they've made those moves. Jordan Matthews in a trade that didn't work out. Kelvin Benjamin in a trade that didn't work out. And it's so they.
But none of those guys are AB.
No, and the Jets have been known to kind of. Wear off the tread of veterans like Matt Forte and LaDainian Tomlinson in the past and try and see what else they can squeeze out of some of these players that are heading into the twilight of their career. So, I mean, none of this is really off the table there. It was just kind of looking at who has the cap room, who has the draft collateral. The handful of teams we mentioned there have both and could be the potential fit. Who knows what's going to happen here in the future? And then somebody's got to try and win the Le'Veon Bell sweepstakes. And I still find it hard to believe that there's reports out there that the Steelers may still try and negotiate with him or do something this upcoming offseason. I really believe that ship has sailed. And if they're already talking about trading AB, that ship's definitely sailing. That ship has left the pier and you can't even see it out on the ocean waters. So, but Brian, you know what, man? I mean, we're going to swing back around and talk about some of the coaching and culture change, and this is definitely a big component of it. But thanks once again for joining me and our listeners today.
Always happy to be here. And thank you for, a pleasant conversation.
Definitely a pleasant conversation. We're not at each other's throats yet. Just wait, though. He's, he can get grumpy, and I can too. So his name's Brian. My name's Joe. Don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you are listening. And thanks once again. If you have listened this far into the episode, look forward to your comments. Until next time, we encourage everyone to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.